Hello, I'm Simon, and this is 24 Years of ITiCSE Authors. It's a paper that was put together to celebrate ITiCSE's 25th year. Unfortunately, since then, ITiCSE's 25th celebration has been moved to next year, but never mind, we'll do what we can. This is a paper in bibliometrics, which is the study of measurable aspects of a body of papers and/or the authors of the papers. And this one focuses on the authors. Is it computing education? No, definitely not. But if we apply it to a computing education conference, is it of interest to that conference? Well, the reviewers and the meta-reviewer and the conference chairs seem to think the answer is yes. Over its 24 years, ITiCSE has had 1,295 full papers and 129 working group reports. And if you add up the names beneath the titles of all of those papers and reports, you get 4,559 names. But they clearly don't represent 4,559 distinct authors, because authors tend to contribute to multiple papers. And figuring out how many actual authors there are is not as simple as it might seem, because authors often write their names in different ways. E. Suutinen and Erkki Suutinen are the same author. Michael Goldweber, Mikey Goldweber, and indeed Mike Goldweber are the same author. Rocky Ross and Rockford J. Ross. Look, I'm guessing, but I think they're probably the same author. Likewise, Anne Aplin, E. Anne G. Aplin, and another one, I think, E. Anne Aplin. I think they're all the same author. I think Ava is the same author here, just using different character sets. On the other hand, Gordon Davies and Gordon Davies are not the same author. Arto Vihavainen and Arto Hellas are the same author. Chris Johnson and Chris Johnson are not the same author. And then we move into the realm of spelling mistakes. It must be a little bit embarrassing to have your name misspelt on the cover sheet of one of your papers, but it's happened to Todd Milford, and it's happened twice in 2 consecutive years to Mordecai Ben-Ari, to whom, by the way, congratulations for this year winning the Carl V. Karlstrom Outstanding Educator Award. Well done, Motti. Okay, so once we go through that rather tortuous process, we seem to have 2,708 distinct authors. And for the rest of this presentation, we'll pick out a few interesting properties of that set of authors. I've defined a persistent ITiCSE author as an author who had a paper in the first 5 years of the conference and who's had a paper in the most recent 5 years. And we see that we have 4 authors from 1996 who've still been writing recently for ITiCSE. We have 5 authors from 1997. We have 4 from 1998. 1 from 1999, and 7 from 2000. We look at how many papers an author has contributed to, and Judy Sheard is a real standout here. Over the 23 years that she's been writing for ITiCSE, she's contributed to 31 papers. Andrew Luxton Riley is not one of the persistent authors, but in the time that he has been with ITiCSE, he's contributed 23, which is pretty impressive as well. And there's quite a few other names there. But the number of papers you've contributed to is not the only way of measuring an author's contribution. Another is the proportional contribution. So if we give each paper a count of 1 and divide it among the authors, If the paper has only one author, that author gets a count of 1. But if it has 4 authors, each author gets a count of a quarter. So adding these proportional contributions, we get a rather different list, which tends to emphasize authors who have worked with fewer co-authors and therefore got a higher proportional count. This, of course, raises the question of how many co-authors any author has had. And once again, Judy Sheard is in the lead with 94 distinct ITiCSE co-authors. But very close behind is Chuck Riedesel, and Chuck is there not because of a large number of papers. He's only contributed to half as many papers as Judy, but every one of his papers has been a working group report, and writing working group reports is a good way to get large numbers of co-authors. Another thing we can look at is the countries from which papers come. Now, it won't surprise anyone to know that the United States has contributed more ITiCSE papers than any other country. However, the United States is a big country. So let's look at number of papers contributed per million people in a country. And when we do that, Finland is in the clear lead, closely followed by New Zealand, Israel. Scotland deserves a bit of a mention. Scotland is, of course, not a country. It is a nation within the country that's the United Kingdom, although who knows whether that will still be the case in a few years' time. But I've noticed that authors from the United Kingdom quite often put Scotland or Wales or Northern Ireland or England as part of their affiliation and address. So I've put the separate nations here as well as putting the United Kingdom itself. Let's finish with a picture. We've grouped the countries into regions. The size of the circle for each region is proportional to the number of papers from that region. And the thickness of the lines between regions is proportional to the number of papers co-authored by people in those regions. And a real bonus here for people from the Southern Hemisphere is that the image is somewhat reminiscent of the Southern Cross, one of our favourite constellations. Of course, there's a lot more detail in the paper, so if you've got anything out of the presentation, go and read the paper.